High in the mountains of Pleasant Grove, where pine trees whisper secrets to the wind and autumn leaves dance across winding trails, stands the prestigious Silver Creek Equestrian Center. Its weathered wooden fences and modern facilities tell stories of countless riders who've passed through its gates, but none quite like the tale that unfolded on that crisp October afternoon, a story that would forever change how the community viewed its most misunderstood resident. Among the center's many horses, one stood apart from the rest. Shadow, a magnificent grey dappled stallion with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages, had earned quite a reputation. Former show-jumping champion turned rebellious outcast, he'd developed a habit of challenging even the most experienced riders. The stable hands whispered about his unpredictable nature, while visitors admired him from a safe distance, warned away by the bright red caution sign that hung prominently on his pen. For 13-year-old Emma Thompson, the Equestrian Center represented everything new and intimidating about her life in Pleasant Grove. Having moved from the city just 2 months ago, she was still adjusting to suburban life in the shadow of the mountains. Her mother had insisted she join some after-school activities to make friends, which is how she found herself trailing behind Madison Parker and her tight-knit group of friends that Sunday afternoon. "Come on, Emma, you can't just watch from the sidelines forever," Madison called out, her confident voice carrying across the stable yard. Ashley, Sophia, and Katie giggled in agreement, their matching riding boots clicking against the concrete as they surrounded their newest potential friend. Emma shifted uncomfortably, aware of how out of place she looked in her regular sneakers and jeans. Unlike the others who practically lived at Silver Creek, she had never even touched a horse before. But something about Shadow had caught her attention from the moment she arrived. Perhaps it was the way he stood apart from the other horses, or how his grey coat shimmered like morning mist in the mountain sunlight. "I don't know," Emma hesitated, watching as Shadow paced in his pen with the fluid grace of a dancer. "Mrs. Anderson said he's not for beginners." Madison's blue eyes sparkled with mischief as she flipped her long blonde ponytail. "Mrs. Anderson says a lot of things, but she's busy with the beginner class right now, and David's on his lunch break. Besides," she lowered her voice conspiratorially, "don't you want to be part of something exciting?" The other girls crowded closer, their excitement palpable. Katie, the youngest of the group, bounced on her toes. "Madison's right. We all did something crazy to prove ourselves. It's like an initiation." Emma's heart raced as she looked between the eager faces of her potential friends and Shadow's pen. The stallion had stopped pacing and was now watching them intently, his ears perked forward with interest. She could feel the weight of two different kinds of peer pressure, the girl's expectations and her own desire to finally belong somewhere in this new town. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Emma asked, already dreading the answer. Sophia, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward with a sly smile. "Simple. We help you into Shadow's pen. Just for a minute. Long enough to prove you're not afraid." "That's insane," Emma protested, but her voice lacked conviction. The truth was, despite her fear, there was something about Shadow that called to her. Every time she looked at him, she felt an inexplicable connection, as if those intelligent eyes were trying to tell her something. "It'll be fine," Ashley assured her, already moving toward the pen. "Shadow never actually hurts anyone. He just acts tough. Besides, we'll be right here to help if anything happens." Emma found herself being guided toward the pen, her feet moving almost against her will. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ground, and a cool mountain breeze carried the scent of pine and hay. Shadow watched their approach, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his dappled coat. "Ready?" Madison whispered, her hands already positioned to give Emma a boost over the fence. "Just remember to stay calm. Horses can sense fear." Before Emma could change her mind, she felt herself being lifted. The world seemed to slow down as she balanced precariously on the fence rail. Shadow's pen suddenly looked much larger from this height, and the stallion much more imposing. In that suspended moment, Emma caught Shadow's gaze, and something passed between them, a flicker of understanding perhaps, or a shared sense of being misunderstood. Then gravity took over. Emma landed in the soft dirt of the pen, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The other girl's excited whispers seemed distant now as she stood face to face with one of the most powerful horses in Pleasant Grove. Shadow lifted his head, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the moment that would define Emma's place in their social circle. But what happened next would change not just Emma's status among her peers, but the entire dynamic of Silver Creek Equestrian Center. Time seemed to stand still in shadows. Open as Emma held her breath, watching the massive stallion assess her presence. His powerful muscles tensed beneath his dappled coat, and for a moment, the only sound was the whisper of wind through the pine trees surrounding Silver Creek. Shadow took one step forward, then another, his hooves making soft impressions in the dirt. The girls outside the pen had fallen silent, their earlier giggles replaced by nervous tension. Even Madison, who had been so confident in her plan, gripped the fence with white knuckles. But something extraordinary was happening inside that pen. As Shadow approached Emma, his movement wasn't aggressive or threatening. Instead, he moved with an almost careful grace, as if approaching a longtime friend. Emma remained frozen, remembering what Madison had said about horses sensing fear. Yet surprisingly, she realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Shadow stopped just inches from Emma, lowering his magnificent head to her level. His breath was warm against her face, carrying the sweet scent of hay and mountain grass. Those eyes that had seemed so distant and challenging to others now held a gentleness that made Emma's heart swell with unexpected emotion. He's being gentle, Katie whispered in disbelief from beyond the fence. Emma slowly lifted her hand, letting it hover in the space between them. Shadow regarded it for a moment before pressing his velvet nose against her palm. The connection was electric, not in a frightening way, but like completing a circuit that had always been meant to connect. "I don't believe it," Sophia breathed. "He never lets anyone touch him like that." As if to prove her wrong, Shadow took another step closer, carefully positioning himself so that his shoulder was next to Emma. It was a gesture every experienced rider would recognize. An invitation to touch, to connect, to trust. Emma ran, her hand along Shadow's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath his coat. The stallion released a deep breath, and she could feel years of tension melting away from his body. This wasn't the dangerous rebel everyone feared. This was a creature seeking understanding, just like her. Just then, the sound of running footsteps broke the magical moment. David, the young stable hand, came racing around the corner, his face pale with worry. "What's going on here? I heard voices and—" His words trailed off as he took in the scene before him. Emma stood in the pen, her hand resting comfortably on Shadow's neck, while the proud stallion stood peacefully beside her. It was a sight that defied everything David thought he knew about the horse he'd spent months trying to handle. "Don't move," David said softly, reaching for the gate. "I'll get you out of there." But before he could open it, something unexpected happened. Shadow positioned himself between Emma and the gate, not aggressively but protectively. His message was clear. Emma wasn't in danger, and he wasn't ready for their moment to end. "Wait," Emma called out to David, surprising herself with her confidence. "He's not going to hurt me. He's just misunderstood." Mrs. Anderson appeared next, having heard the commotion from the training arena. Her stern expression quickly transformed into one of amazement as she witnessed the scene unfolding in Shadow's pen. In all her years running Silver Creek, she had never seen anything quite like this. "Emma Thompson," she said, her voice carrying both concern and curiosity. "You do realize you're standing in the pen with our most challenging horse?" Emma nodded, still stroking Shadow's neck. "He's not challenging, Mrs. Anderson. He's lonely. Look at how he's acting. He just wanted someone to see him, really see him." As if understanding her words, Shadow gently pressed his head against Emma's shoulder, causing her to giggle. The sound seemed to break the tension in the air, and even Mrs. Anderson's severe expression softened. "In all my years," she mused, "I've never seen him take to anyone like this, not since he retired from show jumping." She turned to Madison and her friends, who had the decency to look ashamed. "Though I suspect this meeting wasn't exactly planned, was it?" Before anyone could respond, a commotion erupted from the main stable. A group of young riders came bursting out, chasing after a loose pony who had somehow slipped its lead. The pony, a small chestnut named Butterscotch, was heading straight for Shadow's pen in a panic. Everything happened in an instant.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The pony crashed into the fence, causing the other horses in nearby pens to startle. But Shadow remained calm, positioning himself between Emma and the chaos. When Butterscotch began to rear in fear, Shadow let out a gentle nicker, a sound so soothing that the pony immediately began to settle. Emma, acting on pure instinct, slowly approached Butterscotch while keeping one hand on Shadow. The pony's wild eyes began to calm as it responded to their combined energy. By the time David arrived with a lead rope, Butterscotch was standing quietly, surrounded by an aura of peace that seemed to emanate from Shadow and Emma's connection. Mrs. Anderson watched all this with growing interest. "Well," she said finally, "it seems we've all misjudged a few things today. Shadow, for one, and you, Emma, have shown us something quite extraordinary." As the excitement died down, Emma realized her whole body was trembling, not with fear, but with exhilaration. She had connected with this magnificent creature in a way that defied explanation, and in doing so had found something she didn't even know she was looking for. Madison stepped forward, her earlier bravado replaced by genuine remorse. "Emma, I'm so sorry. We shouldn't have pressured you. What we did was dangerous and stupid." But Emma barely heard her. She was lost in Shadow's gaze, understanding flowing. Between them, without words, this wasn't just about proving herself to her peers anymore. This was about finding her place in the world, about recognizing that sometimes the most beautiful connections come from facing our fears and choosing to see beyond the surface. Mrs. Anderson cleared her throat. "Emma, would you be interested in taking riding lessons? It seems Shadow has chosen his rider, and I've learned over the years not to argue with a horse's instincts." Emma's heart soared at the suggestion. She looked at Shadow, who nickered softly as if giving his approval. In that moment, she knew her life in Pleasant Grove would never be the same. What had started as a reckless dare had transformed into something profound, a partnership, a purpose, and a place to belong. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across Silver Creek, Emma gave Shadow one final pat before reluctantly leaving his pen. But this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that sometimes the most extraordinary relationships can emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. The other girls gathered around Emma, their attitudes completely transformed. They bombarded her with questions and apologies, but Emma's attention remained on Shadow. The proud stallion stood at his fence, watching her with those knowing eyes, and she could have sworn he winked at her. In the days that followed, Silver Creek Equestrian Center would witness a remarkable transformation. Shadow, once known for his rebellious spirit, became a gentle teacher under Emma's care. Together, they would go on to inspire others, proving that with patience, understanding, and an open heart, even the wildest spirits can find their perfect match. And so, in the shadow of the mountains, where pine trees whisper ancient secrets and autumn winds carry dreams on their wings, a new legend was born. One of trust, courage, and the incredible bond between a girl and a horse who saw past each other's facades to find something truly magical. The following weeks at Silver Creek Equestrian Center brought changes that nobody could have predicted. Emma arrived early each morning before school, her breath visible in the crisp mountain air as she made her way to Shadow's pen. The Stallion would greet her with a soft nicker, pressing his dappled face against the fence in anticipation of their time together. Mrs. Anderson had started Emma with basic groundwork, teaching her how to properly lead Shadow, groom him, and understand his body language. But it quickly became apparent that the connection between girl and horse went far beyond the usual trainer-student relationship. Shadow, who had once rejected any attempt at routine care, now stood perfectly still as Emma cleaned his hooves and brushed his coat until it gleamed like polished silver in the morning sun. "It's remarkable," David commented one morning as he watched Emma expertly navigate around the massive stallion. "6 months ago, it took 3 of us just to get him vetted. Now look at him, he's like a different horse." Emma smiled, running her fingers through Shadow's freshly brushed mane. "He just needed someone to understand him," she said softly. "Sometimes the scariest ones are just the most hurt." But their peaceful morning routine was about to face its first real test. Mrs. Anderson approached Emma with an unusual request as she finished her grooming session. "The Mountain View Therapeutic Riding Program called," she explained, watching Shadow's ears prick forward at her voice. "They're bringing a group of children with special needs tomorrow, but we're short on suitable horses. I've been watching you two together, and I think Shadow might be ready for something more." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Shadow had only just started accepting other people approaching him when she was present. The idea of introducing him to a group of children seemed daunting. "I don't know, Mrs. Anderson." Emma hesitated. "Shadow's still getting used to everything. What if he gets overwhelmed?" The stable owner's eyes crinkled with understanding. "That's exactly why I'm asking you, Emma. You understand him in a way none of us ever could. These children, they're often misunderstood too. Sometimes the most unlikely combinations create the most beautiful results." That evening, Emma stayed late at the stable, working with Shadow in the round pen. The setting sun painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold as she talked to him, explaining tomorrow's challenge as if he could understand every word. Perhaps he did, because his usually proud head was lowered to her level, his eyes soft and attentive. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Emma arrived earlier than usual, her stomach tight with nervous anticipation. To her surprise, Madison was already there, leading her bay mare out of her stall. "I thought you might want some support," Madison offered sheepishly. Their relationship had evolved since the pen incident, growing into a genuine friendship built on mutual respect rather than peer pressure. The sound of approaching vehicles made both girls turn. A small bus and several cars were making their way up the gravel drive, carrying the children from Mountain View. Emma took a deep breath and headed to Shadow's pen. The stallion was already alert, his ears forward as he watched the vehicles. "Approach." Emma slipped inside, attaching his lead rope with practiced ease. "Today's a big day," she whispered. "I need you to be the gentle soul I know you are." The children began arriving at the stable yard, some in wheelchairs, others walking with assistance. Their excited voices carried across the morning air, mixing with their parents' more nervous tones. Mrs. Anderson gathered everyone for a safety briefing, while Emma stood with Shadow at a distance, letting him observe the activity. A small girl in a wheelchair caught Emma's eye. Unlike the other children who were chattering excitedly, she sat quietly, her eyes fixed on Shadow, with an intensity that reminded Emma of herself. Her mother introduced them. The girl's name was Sophie, and she had never been able to ride before due to her cerebral palsy. "He's beautiful," Sophie whispered, her eyes never leaving Shadow. Emma glanced up at Shadow, who had lowered his head to peer curiously at the wheelchair. There was no tension in his body, no sign of the nervousness she had feared. Instead, he took a careful step forward, then another, until his nose was inches from Sophie's outstretched hand. The entire stable yard fell silent as Shadow, the once feared Stallion, gently nuzzled Sophie's palm. The girl's face lit up with a joy so pure it brought tears to Emma's eyes. "Would you like to brush him?" Emma asked, already reaching for a soft brush. What followed was nothing short of magical. Shadow stood like a statue as Sophie, with Emma's help, ran the brush over his gleaming coat. Other children gradually approached, drawn by Shadow's gentle demeanor. The Stallion seemed to understand the importance of his role, adjusting his position for each child, lowering his head for those who couldn't reach, standing perfectly still for those who needed more time. Mrs. Anderson watched from the sidelines, wiping tears from her eyes. "In all my years," she murmured to David, "I've never seen anything quite like this." The morning progressed with Shadow at the center of attention. While other horses helped with riding sessions, Shadow became the star of the grooming station. His patience seemed endless as small hands braided his mane, his eyes soft and content as children shared their secrets with him. But the real breakthrough came when Sophie's mother asked if there was any way her daughter could experience what it felt like to be on a horse. Mrs. Anderson looked hesitant. Shadow had never been used for therapeutic riding. Yet before anyone could respond, the Stallion had positioned himself perfectly beside the mounting block, as if he had been doing this his whole life. With careful coordination between Emma, David, and Sophie's mother, and using special adaptive equipment, they helped Sophie onto Shadow's broad back. The moment she was secured, Shadow's entire demeanor changed. He carried himself with the grace and care of his show-jumping days, but with a gentleness that brought fresh tears to everyone's eyes. "I'm flying," Sophie whispered as Shadow took careful steps around the arena, Emma leading him while additional spotters walked alongside. "Mom, look, I'm flying." That day marked a turning point for Silver Creek Equestrian Center. Word spread about the former champion showjumper who had found his true calling as a therapy horse. Shadow, once isolated in his pen, became the heart of the therapeutic riding program, working alongside Emma to help children discover their own strength and confidence. Madison approached Emma at the end of that first successful day as they watched Shadow gentling, grazing in his pen, surrounded by the golden light of sunset. "You know what's amazing?" Madison said softly. "That day, when we stupidly convinced you to jump into his pen, we thought we were playing a prank. But really, we were just instruments of fate. You and Shadow were meant to find each other." Emma smiled, watching as Shadow lifted his head to gaze at the mountains, his profile regal against the darkening sky. "Sometimes the scariest moments in our lives lead us exactly where we're meant to be," she replied. "Shadow taught me that sometimes you have to take a leap of faith to find your true purpose." The mountain air grew cooler as evening approached, carrying the scent of pine and promise. In his pen, Shadow nickered softly, calling Emma over for their nightly ritual. As she hugged his neck, breathing in his familiar scent, Emma knew that their story was far from over. This was just the beginning of a journey that would continue to touch lives and prove that sometimes the most beautiful souls are simply waiting for someone brave enough to see past their defenses and love them for exactly who they are. As autumn faded into winter, Silver Creek Equestrian Center faced new challenges. Heavy snow blanketed the mountain paths, and bitter winds whistled through the stable walls. Yet despite the harsh weather, Emma never missed a morning with Shadow. She would arrive wrapped in layers, her boots crunching through fresh snow, to find him waiting expectantly by his gate. One particularly cold morning, Emma noticed something different about Shadow. The usually energetic Stallion seemed subdued, his head hanging slightly lower than normal. When she reached to touch his neck, she felt unusual warmth beneath his thick winter coat. "Mrs. Anderson," Emma called out, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "Something's wrong with Shadow." The stable owner hurried over, her experienced hands running along Shadow's body. Her frown deepened as she checked his temperature. "He's running a fever. David, call Dr. Martinez immediately." The next few hours were tense. Dr. Martinez diagnosed Shadow with a respiratory infection common in horses during the harsh mountain winters, but potentially dangerous if not treated properly. Emma's heart sank as the vet explained that Shadow would need to rest. No therapeutic riding sessions, no training, just quiet recovery time. "But the children from Mountain View are coming tomorrow," Emma protested. "Sophie's been looking forward to seeing him all week." Mrs. Anderson placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. Sometimes part of loving means knowing when to step back and let them heal. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, worried about Shadow alone in his pen. At dawn, she convinced her mother to drive her to the stable early. The thermometer read -10 degrees as they pulled up to Silver Creek. To Emma's surprise, she wasn't the first one there. Madison stood outside Shadow's pen, leading her bay mare, Star, in slow circles. "I thought he might like some company," Madison explained, gesturing to Shadow, who had his head over the fence, watching Star with interest. "Horses are herd animals. Sometimes just having a friend nearby helps them feel better." Emma felt tears welling up in her eyes, touched by Madison's thoughtfulness. Together, they spent the morning taking turns, walking Star near Shadow's pen, talking softly, and making sure he had fresh water that hadn't frozen. When the Mountain View bus arrived, Emma's stomach clenched with anxiety. How would she explain to Sophie that she couldn't see Shadow today? But before she could worry further, she heard Madison's voice behind her. "I have an idea," Madison said, leading Star forward. "Shadow taught us all about second chances and looking past appearances. Maybe it's time we help other horses follow his example." Emma watched in amazement as Madison introduced Star to Sophie. The bay mare, usually known for being spirited and somewhat difficult, lowered her head gently to the girl's wheelchair, mimicking the behavior she'd seen Shadow display so many times. "She's learning from him," Emma realized aloud, watching as Star stood patiently for Sophie's tentative pats, just like we all did. Throughout the day, other riders brought their horses to help with the therapeutic sessions. Even Mrs. Anderson's usually reserved dressage horse joined in, responding to the children with unexpected gentleness. From his pen, Shadow watched it all, his bright eyes following the activities despite his illness. As the days passed, Shadow's condition slowly improved. Emma spent every free moment with him, reading books aloud as she sat bundled up in his pen, sharing stories about the therapeutic sessions he was missing. Sometimes she caught him watching the other horses working with the children, his ears pricked forward with interest. One snowy afternoon, as Emma was changing Shadow's water, she heard an unexpected sound. Hoofbeats on the frozen ground, moving fast. She looked up to see Star galloping past, her lead rope trailing behind her, with Madison running desperately after her. Without hesitation, Shadow let out a powerful neigh. The sound echoed across the snow-covered paddocks, causing Star to slide to a stop. The mare turned, trotting back toward Shadow's pen as if drawn by an invisible force. Madison caught up and grabbed her lead rope, shooting a grateful look toward Shadow. "Even when he's sick, he's still looking out for everyone," David commented, having witnessed the whole scene. Finally, after what felt like endless weeks, Dr. Martinez declared Shadow fully recovered. The morning he was cleared to return to work, Emma arrived to find the stable buzzing with excitement. News had spread quickly, and families from Mountain View had organized a special celebration. Sophie arrived with a hand-drawn card featuring a gray horse surrounded by hearts. Other children brought carrots and apples, carefully saving them, until Emma could help them offer the treats to Shadow. The stallion accepted each gift with noble grace, as if understanding the meaning behind them. But the most touching moment came when Sophie's mother approached Emma with tears in her eyes. During these weeks without Shadow, Sophie has been practicing sitting up stronger in her wheelchair, she explained. She said she needed to be ready when her special friend came back. The physical therapist can't believe her progress. Emma looked at Shadow, who was now surrounded by his young friends, his eyes bright and healthy again. He had transformed, not just himself, but the entire stable. Every horse seemed to stand a little taller, act a little gentler, as if inspired by his example. Even the most challenging horses had shown remarkable changes after watching him work with the children. Madison joined Emma as they watched Shadow with his admirers. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "that day we pushed you into his pen seems like a lifetime ago. We thought we were being clever, but really we were just part of something much bigger than ourselves." Emma nodded, remembering her own fear that day. Sometimes the scariest moments in our lives are actually doorways to something beautiful. We just have to be brave enough to step through them. As winter began to soften into early spring, Silver Creek Equestrian Center had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Shadow's pen, once isolated at the far end of the property, had become the heart of the stable. Other horses were now brought nearby during their rest periods, as if being close to him helped calm them. Young riders would stop by just to talk to him, sharing their worries and dreams with the wise old stallion who seemed to understand everything. Mrs. Anderson had even started offering special training sessions, teaching other riders and horses the gentle techniques that Emma and Shadow had naturally discovered together. "Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who had to learn the hardest lessons themselves," she would say, watching Shadow demonstrate his perfect patience with a nervous new therapy horse. The mountain winds still blew cold, and the peaks remained snow-capped, but change was in the air. Just as Shadow had transformed from a feared outcast to a beloved teacher, the entire stable had evolved into something more than just a riding school. It had become a place of healing, of second chances, of unexpected friendships. Emma stood in Shadow's pen, her arms wrapped around his strong neck, breathing in the scent that had become so familiar and precious to her. Above them, an eagle soared against the bright mountain sky, its cry carrying across the valley. Shadow lifted his head to watch it, and Emma felt his quiet strength flow through her. Together, they had proven that the most powerful bonds often come from the most unexpected beginnings, and that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to look past the surface to change not just one life, but an entire community. Spring arrived in Pleasant Grove with a burst of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. The mountain slopes transformed from white to green, and the air filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers. At Silver Creek Equestrian Center, this change of season brought unexpected news that would test the bond between Emma and Shadow. Mrs. Anderson gathered the stable's regular riders one sunny morning, her expression a mix of excitement and concern. "We've been selected to host the Regional Therapeutic Riding Championship," she announced. "It's a huge honor, but it also means we have a lot of work ahead of us." The championship would bring therapeutic riding programs from across 3 states, along with judges, spectators, and press. Silver Creek's transformation from a traditional riding school to a respected therapeutic riding center had caught attention, largely thanks to Shadow's remarkable story. Emma Mrs. Anderson continued. "They're particularly interested in seeing Shadow work. His reputation has spread far beyond our valley." Emma felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. Shadow had come so far from the feared Stallion of months ago, but this would put him in front of hundreds of strangers. She glanced at his pen, where he stood watching the meeting with pricked ears, as if understanding the weight of the moment. The next weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. New jumps were painted, arenas were groomed, and extra paddocks were built to accommodate the visiting horses. Emma spent every spare moment working with Shadow, refining their communication, and preparing him for the crowds they would face. Madison and the other girls helped too, gradually exposing Shadow to more activity and noise. They played music during training sessions, brought in colorful flags and banners, and invited more people to watch their practice sessions. Through it all, Shadow remained steady, drawing strength from his trust in Emma. Sophie had become a regular fixture at these practice sessions, her wheelchair positioned near the arena where she could watch Shadow work. Her progress in physical therapy had been remarkable, inspired by her determination to be more involved with the horses. She now had a special saddle that allowed her to ride Shadow for short periods, their bond growing stronger with each session. One evening, as Emma finished grooming Shadow, Sophie's mother approached with news that would add another layer of complexity to their championship preparation. "The doctors think Sophie might be ready to try walking with crutches," she explained, her eyes bright with hope. "They want to incorporate equine therapy into her treatment, and they specifically mentioned Shadow." The request meant adding new exercises to their already full preparation schedule, but Emma didn't hesitate. Shadow had shown time and again that he was capable of more than anyone expected. As if confirming her thoughts, the Stallion gently nuzzled Sophie's hair, earning a giggle from the girl. However, their carefully laid plans faced an unexpected challenge 2 weeks before the championship. A late spring storm swept through the valley, bringing heavy rains that swelled the mountain streams. The access road to Silver Creek was partially washed out, leaving only a narrow passage for vehicles. Mrs. Anderson called an emergency meeting. "The road repair crew says it will take at least 10 days to fix the damage," she explained. "The championship is in 14 days. We have a decision to make." The other stable owners offered to help transport their horses and equipment using the back mountain trail, a longer route, but one that would bypass the damaged road. It would require the horses to be led carefully along steep paths, something that would test even the most well-trained animals. Emma spent that night in Shadow's pen, talking through their options. The Stallion stood quietly, his head lowered to her level, ears moving back and forth as she spoke. Despite his transformation, Shadow had never left the security of Silver Creek since arriving years ago. The mountain trail would be a significant test. "What do you think, boy?" she whispered, stroking his dappled neck. "Are we ready for this?" The next morning, Emma and Shadow began preparing for the trail. David helped set up obstacles in the arena, simulating some of the challenges they might face. They worked with different ground surfaces, navigated tight spaces, and practiced remaining calm in unusual situations. Sophie watched these sessions from her wheelchair, offering encouragement and occasionally suggesting ideas. Her own therapy was progressing well. She could now stand for short periods while holding the special mounting block railings, her determination matching Shadow's patient spirit. 3 days before they needed to move the horses, Emma and Shadow did a trial run on a small section of the mountain trail. Madison rode Star alongside them, providing support and companionship. The path was narrow and steep in places, with loose rocks and sudden drops that would challenge any horse's nerve. Shadow approached each obstacle with careful consideration. He placed his hooves deliberately, showing none of the nervous energy that had once made him unreachable. When they encountered a particularly tricky section, He waited patiently while Emma assessed the best route, trusting her judgment completely. They were nearly back to the stable when they heard a cry for help. An older man had slipped on the wet trail while hiking and was unable to stand. Without hesitation, Shadow positioned himself so the man could use his sturdy frame as support, allowing Emma and Madison to help him back to the stable where they could call for medical assistance. "That horse of yours," the man said, as they waited for help. "He's something special. Most horses would have spooked at a stranger stumbling around on a narrow trail." The incident reinforced what everyone at Silver Creek already knew. Shadow's transformation went far beyond simple training. He had developed an almost uncanny ability to sense when he was needed and how to help. The day of the great move arrived. Clear and cold, the horses would be led in small groups along the mountain trail with experienced riders spaced out to provide assistance if needed. Shadow, despite his calm demeanor during practice, would face his biggest test yet. Emma arrived before dawn to find Sophie already there, bundled up in warm clothes and sitting straighter in her wheelchair than ever before. "I wanted to wish Shadow luck," she explained, holding out a bright red ribbon. "It's from my first physical, a therapy milestone. I thought maybe it could be his good luck charm." With tears in her eyes, Emma tied the ribbon to Shadow's halter. The stallion lowered his head to Sophie's level, allowing her to give him a gentle kiss on his nose. The moment captured everything their journey had been about: trust, courage, and the power of believing in second chances. The morning sun was just touching the mountain peaks as they began their journey. Shadow walked beside Emma with confident steps, his dappled coat glowing in the early light. Other horses followed, drawing courage from his steady presence. Even the most nervous animals seemed to calm down when they were near him. As they climbed higher along the trail, Emma realized that this journey represented far more than just a practical solution to their problem. It was a testament to how far they had come, from that frightening moment in Shadow's pen to this display of absolute trust and partnership. The mountain air grew thinner as they ascended, but Shadow never faltered. He helped guide younger horses, passed difficult sections, waited patiently when others needed rest, and maintained his gentle demeanor despite the challenging conditions. The red ribbon from Sophie fluttered in the mountain breeze, a constant reminder of the lives they had touched and the barriers they had broken. The alternate venue for the regional Therapeutic Riding Championship sprawled across a vast meadow nestled between mountain peaks. Temporary stables had been erected, their white canvas walls billowing gently in the spring breeze. Shadow and the other horses from Silver Creek had arrived safely after their mountain trek, though the journey had taken most of the day. Emma worked quietly in Shadow's temporary stall, making sure he was comfortable in the new surroundings. The stallion seemed unusually alert, his ears constantly moving as he took in the unfamiliar sounds and scents. Horses from other centers were arriving steadily, their trailers kicking up dust on the makeshift parking area. "How's he settling in?" Madison asked, appearing at the stall door with 2 steaming cups of hot chocolate. She handed one to Emma, who gratefully accepted the warm drink. "He's watching everything," Emma replied, observing Shadow's keen interest in his surroundings. "But he's calm. It's like he knows this is important." The championship would begin the next morning with 3 days of events showcasing different aspects of therapeutic riding. Shadow and Emma were scheduled to demonstrate their work with Sophie, who would arrive the following day. They would also participate in a special exhibition showing how formerly challenging horses could be transformed into therapy partners. As darkness fell over the meadow, the temperature dropped dramatically. Emma added an extra blanket to Shadow's collection and made sure his water hadn't frozen. The mountain nights were cold, even in spring, and the temporary stables offered less protection than their familiar barn at Silver Creek. Dawn brought a flurry of activity as final preparations began. The championship's opening ceremony would feature a parade of all participating horses and riders. Emma had just finished braiding Shadow's mane when she heard a commotion outside. "The Mountain View bus is stuck!" someone shouted. The recent rains had left parts of the access road muddy, and the bus carrying Sophie and other program participants had become bogged down halfway up the slope. Without hesitation, Emma led Shadow out of his stall. The stallion seemed to sense the urgency of the situation, following her with purposeful strides. When they reached the stuck bus, Emma could see Sophie's worried face pressed against one of the windows. Several people were already trying to help, placing boards under the bus's wheels for traction. But the vehicle remained firmly stuck, its wheels spinning uselessly in the mud. Shadow watched the scene intently, then did something remarkable. He positioned himself beside the bus, pressing his strong shoulder against its side. Emma understood immediately. With Shadow's strength added to the push and the boards providing traction, the bus slowly began to move. The stallion walked alongside, keeping steady pressure until the vehicle reached solid ground. Cheers erupted from the spectators who had gathered to watch. As Sophie and the other children disembarked, Shadow lowered his head to receive their grateful pats, his eyes soft with contentment. The incident quickly became the talk of the championship, with people marveling at the stallion's intelligence and willingness to help. "That's going in the opening ceremony speech," Mrs. Anderson said proudly, watching as Shadow gently nuzzled Sophie's hair. "There's no better example of what therapeutic riding is all about." The ceremony itself was a colorful spectacle. Horses and riders from across 3 states paraded around the main arena, each program carrying their banner proudly. When Silver Creek's turn came, Emma led Shadow with Sophie riding beside them in her wheelchair. The stallion arched his neck proudly, seeming to understand the significance of the moment, but the real test came during their demonstration. Sophie had been practicing with her new crutches, determined to show how working with Shadow had helped her progress. With careful assistance, she would attempt to walk a short distance alongside the stallion, using both him and the crutches for support. The arena fell silent as Sophie was helped into position. Shadow stood perfectly still, his solid presence providing both physical and emotional support. Emma held his lead rope loosely, trusting him completely. Sophie took her first step, then another. Shadow matched her pace exactly, moving with tiny steps that kept him constantly within her reach. When she wavered slightly, his strong shoulder was there to lean against. Together, they made their way across the arena, each step a victory. The applause when they finished was deafening. Sophie's parents were crying openly, and even the judges were wiping away tears. But Shadow's work wasn't done yet. Throughout the day, he demonstrated his gentle nature with other children, some in wheelchairs, others with different challenges. Each one received his complete attention and patience. During a break between demonstrations, Emma sat with Shadow in a quiet corner of the warm-up area. The stallion was resting his head on her shoulder, his favorite position for their quiet moments together. Madison approached leading star, who had also been helping with demonstrations. "You know what I just realized?" Madison said softly. "If we hadn't been so foolish that day pushing you into his pen, none of this would have happened." Sometimes the worst decisions can lead to the most beautiful results. Emma stroked Shadow's soft nose, remembering her terror that first day. "I think he was just waiting for someone to be brave enough to look past his reputation," she replied. "Sometimes fear keeps us from seeing what's really there." The afternoon brought a special moment that no one had anticipated. The championship organizers had arranged for a photographer to document the event, and they wanted a group photo of all the therapeutic riding horses. Getting 20 horses to stand calmly together would normally be a challenging task, but Shadow once again showed his extraordinary nature. As the horses were brought together, some began to show signs of nervousness at being so close to strangers. Shadow, however, remained calm and steady. Gradually, the other horses seemed to take their cues from him, settling into relaxed poses. The resulting photograph would later become a symbol of the championship. 20 horses of different breeds and backgrounds standing together in perfect harmony. The day's events were winding down when Emma noticed Shadow's attention fixed on something across the arena. A young boy in a wheelchair was looking longingly at the horses, but his parents seemed hesitant to approach. Shadow gave Emma a gentle nudge, his message clear. Leading him over, Emma watched as Shadow worked his magic once again. The boy's initial fear melted away as the stallion lowered his head to wheelchair level, offering gentle friendship. Soon, the boy was giggling as Shadow playfully nibbled at his jacket zipper. As the sun began to set behind the mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the championship grounds, Emma reflected on their journey. From that first frightening encounter in Shadow's pen to this moment of triumph, they had come so far. But more importantly, they had helped others find their own strength along the way. Shadow lifted his head to catch the last rays of sunlight, his dappled coat glowing like polished silver. In his eyes, Emma could see the wisdom that had always been there, waiting for someone to discover it. He wasn't just a therapy horse. He was a teacher, showing everyone who met him that second chances and believing in others could change lives. The success at the regional championship brought unexpected changes to Silver Creek Equestrian Center. News outlets picked up the story of Shadow's transformation, and soon the quiet mountain facility was fielding calls from therapeutic riding programs across the country, all eager to learn their methods. Mrs. Anderson sat down with Emma one morning as she finished grooming Shadow. "We've received an invitation," she began, watching as Shadow contentedly munched on his breakfast. "The National Therapeutic Riding Association wants us to bring Shadow to their annual conference. They'd like us to conduct workshops on rehabilitating difficult horses for therapy work. The conference would be held in a large city, hundreds of miles from their peaceful mountain valley." Emma's heart raced at the thought of taking Shadow so far from home. The stallion seemed to sense her concern, lifting his head to nuzzle her shoulder reassuringly. "They're offering to arrange special transportation," Mrs. Anderson continued, "and they want Sophie to come too, to demonstrate the progress you've made together. But I understand if you think it's too much for him." Emma spent that evening in Shadow's pen, talking through the decision, as she often did. The stallion stood quietly, his ears moving back and forth as she spoke, occasionally offering soft nickers of encouragement. The mountain air was crisp with the scent of pine, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. "What do you think, boy?" she asked, running her hands along his powerful neck. "Are you ready for a bigger adventure?" The next few weeks were filled with careful preparation. David helped construct a special trailer designed to make Shadow as comfortable as possible during the long journey. Madison and the other girls spent hours desensitizing him to various urban sounds they might encounter: traffic noise, sirens, crowds. Sophie's excitement was contagious as she worked with her physical therapists to prepare for their demonstration. She could now walk longer distances with her crutches, using Shadow as a mobile support. The stallion had learned to match her pace perfectly, adjusting his stride to accommodate her progress. The morning of their departure arrived clear and cool. Emma had spent the night in the stable, wanting to be close to Shadow. As the sun rose over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, other riders began arriving to wish them well. "Remember when we thought he was too dangerous to handle?" Madison said, helping Emma load the last of their equipment. "Now he's going to teach others how to help horses like him." The journey would take 2 days, with an overnight stop at a carefully selected stable. As they pulled away from Silver Creek, Emma watched Shadow through the trailer's window. The Stallion stood calmly, Sophie's red ribbon still tied in his mane, a reminder of how far they'd come. Their first challenge came at a busy gas station. The noise and activity would have once sent Shadow into a panic, but now he watched the world with curious interest. When a group of children asked to pet him, he lowered his head gently, demonstrating the patience that had made him such an exceptional therapy horse. The overnight stable was run by an elderly couple who had been involved in therapeutic riding for decades. As they helped unload Shadow for his rest break, the wife watched him with knowing eyes. "You can always tell the special ones," she said, softly. "They have a light in their eyes, a wisdom that goes beyond training. Your Shadow, he reminds me of a horse we had years ago. Sometimes they come into our lives not just to be helped, but to help us understand something about ourselves." That night, Emma slept in the stable again, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a different place. Shadow remained calm, occasionally nickering softly to other horses nearby. His presence seemed to have a soothing effect on the entire stable, just as it did at home. They arrived at the conference center the next afternoon. The facility was enormous, with multiple indoor arenas and stabling for hundreds of horses. Shadow pricked his ears at the new surroundings, but followed Emma confidently, trusting her guidance completely. Their designated stall was in a quiet corner, just as Mrs. Anderson had requested. As they settled Shadow in, a steady stream of visitors began arriving, other trainers, therapeutic riding instructors, and program directors, all eager to meet the famous Stallion they'd heard so much about. "Hard to believe this is the same horse from the stories," one trainer commented, watching as Shadow gently accepted treats from a child in a wheelchair who had stopped by. "What's your secret?" Emma smiled, stroking Shadow's dappled neck. The secret was, there wasn't really a secret. He just needed someone to see past his fear and give him a chance to be himself. The conference officially began the next morning. Shadow and Emma's first workshop focused on identifying horses with therapy potential, even those that might seem unsuitable at first glance. As Emma spoke, Shadow demonstrated various exercises they had developed together, showing how trust could be built gradually and naturally. During one session, a therapeutic riding instructor brought in a nervous horse that had been struggling in their program. Without prompting, Shadow positioned himself nearby, his calm presence seemingly offering reassurance to the anxious animal. Within minutes, the other horse began to relax, mirroring Shadow's peaceful demeanor. "It's like he's teaching them," someone whispered. "He remembers what it was like to be afraid, and he's showing them another way." Sophie's demonstration drew the largest crowd. As she walked alongside Shadow, using him for support while navigating with her crutches, the audience watched in respectful silence. The connection between girl and horse was palpable. Every step they took together represented months of trust, dedication, and mutual understanding. During a break between sessions, Emma found a quiet moment with Shadow. In his stall, the Stallion rested his head on her shoulder, their familiar pose of comfort and connection. Looking into his wise eyes, Emma was struck by how much their lives had changed since that first terrifying moment in his pen. A commotion outside drew their attention. A therapy horse had been spooked by something and was refusing to enter the indoor arena, becoming increasingly agitated. Without hesitation, Emma led Shadow out to help. The Stallion seemed to assess the situation quickly, then positioned himself where the nervous horse could see him. What followed was remarkable to watch. Shadow demonstrated each step calmly, approaching the arena, pausing at the entrance, walking through confidently. The other horse, drawn by his example, gradually began to follow. Within minutes, both horses were walking calmly through the space that had caused such anxiety. "He's not just a therapy horse," Mrs. Anderson observed, watching the scene unfold. "He's become a teacher for other horses, showing them how to overcome their own fears." That evening, a special presentation was held to honor pioneers in therapeutic riding. When they announced Silver Creek's turn, Emma led Shadow into the spotlight. The stallion arched his neck proudly, but his eyes remained soft and gentle. As Emma shared their story, from that first day of fear to their current moment of triumph, she could feel Shadow's quiet strength beside her, constant and unwavering. The final day of the conference brought an unexpected proposal that would test Emma and Shadow's bond in ways they had never imagined. Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned specialist in equine-assisted therapy, approached them after their morning demonstration. "What you've accomplished with Shadow is remarkable," she began, watching as the stallion gentled a nervous therapy horse nearby. "I'm developing a new program for children with severe trauma, and I believe Shadow could be invaluable in helping us establish our methods." The program would be based at a cutting-edge facility in California, complete with specialized equipment and a team of medical professionals. They wanted Shadow to spend 3 months there, working with Dr. Chen's team to develop new therapeutic techniques. Emma's heart sank at the thought of being separated from Shadow for so long. The stallion, sensing her distress, left his task with the other horse and came to stand beside her, pressing his warm shoulder against hers in their familiar gesture of comfort. "You'd be welcome to come too, of course," Dr. Chen added quickly, noting their obvious connection. "We could arrange for you to continue your schooling there. Your insights into Shadow's methods would be invaluable." That evening, Emma sat in Shadow's temporary stall, watching the sunset through the high windows. The stallion stood quietly beside her, occasionally nuzzling her hair as she talked through their options. Moving to California, even temporarily, would mean leaving behind everything familiar. Her family, friends, the mountain valley that had become Shadow's sanctuary. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Sophie stood at the stall door, balancing on her crutches with growing confidence. "Madison told me about California," she said, making her way carefully into the stall. Shadow immediately positioned himself so she could lean against his solid frame. "I don't know what to do," Emma admitted. "This could help so many children, but—" She trailed off, running her hands along Shadow's dappled neck. Sophie was quiet for a moment, thoughtfully patting Shadow's shoulder. "Remember when I was scared to try standing?" she finally said. "Shadow taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing something even though you're scared because it's important." The wisdom in Sophie's words struck Emma deeply. She looked at Shadow, who gazed back with those wise, gentle eyes that had seen through her own fears so many months ago. Perhaps this was the next step in their journey, sharing their gift with others who needed it most. Mrs. Anderson helped arrange the details. Emma would stay with Dr. Chen's family, taking online classes to keep up with her schoolwork. Her parents, seeing the opportunity for their daughter to be part of something meaningful, gave their blessing with proud tears in their eyes. The morning of their departure dawned clear and crisp. The conference center was quiet as they loaded Shadow into the specialized trailer that would take them west. Madison had flown out to help with the journey, understanding that Emma needed a familiar face during this transition. "Silver Creek won't be the same without you two," Madison said, helping secure Shadow's traveling gear. "But think of all the lives you'll touch. Besides," she added with a smile, "the mountains will still be here when you get back." The journey to California took 3 days with carefully planned stops at selected stables along the way. Shadow handled each new location with his characteristic calm, though Emma noticed he stayed especially close to her, as if offering reassurance that they were in this together. Dr. Chen's facility was situated in a sprawling valley surrounded by rolling hills that were more golden than green. Modern buildings gleamed in the California sunshine, and carefully designed sensory gardens dotted the landscape. It was beautiful, but very different from their mountain home. Shadow surveyed his new surroundings with interest as they led him to his spacious stall. The stable was state-of-the-art, with climate control and rubber flooring, but Emma made sure to add touches from home: his favorite brush, the red ribbon from Sophie, and fresh pine branches to remind him of their mountain valley. The first week was devoted to helping Shadow adjust to his new environment. Dr. Chen insisted that he be given time to acclimate before beginning work with the children. Emma spent every possible moment with him, exploring their new surroundings together and establishing a routine that would provide stability in this unfamiliar place. Other therapy horses resided at the facility, each specially chosen for their gentle nature. Yet even among these exceptional animals, Shadow stood out. The stable staff soon noticed that anxious horses calmed in his presence, and even the most troubled children were drawn to his peaceful energy. Their first session with Dr. Chen's program proved why they had been chosen. A young girl named Maya, who hadn't spoken since experiencing a traumatic event, was their initial patient. She arrived clutching a worn, stuffed horse, her eyes downcast and wary. Shadow, with his uncanny ability to read humans, approached Maya with such gentleness that even Dr. Chen was moved to tears. He lowered his great head to the level of her stuffed toy, nickering softly as if greeting a fellow horse. The ghost of a smile touched Maya's lips, the first response they'd seen from her in months. Over the following days, Maya began spending more time at the stable. She would sit quietly near Shadow's stall, sometimes reading to him in a whisper that grew steadily stronger. The stallion seemed to understand the importance of these moments, standing attentively with his ears pricked forward, listening to every word. Emma watched their interactions with growing understanding. Shadow wasn't just helping these children heal. He was teaching them the same lesson he had taught her that first day in his pen. Fear didn't have to define you. Trust, when given a chance to grow, could transform lives. Other children soon joined the program, each carrying their own invisible wounds. Shadow approached each one differently, somehow knowing exactly what they needed. For some, he was playful, making them laugh with gentle games. For others, he was still and steady, offering silent strength as they processed their emotions. Dr. Chen's team documented everything, amazed by Shadow's intuitive responses. "He's rewriting our understanding of equine therapy," she told Emma one evening. "It's not just about the riding or the physical connection. It's about the horse choosing to meet each child exactly where they are emotionally." Emma's proudest moment came when Maya spoke her first full sentence in public. During a group session, Shadow had done something silly, pretending to fall asleep while standing up, then jerking awake with comical surprise. Maya's laugh rang out across the arena, followed by clear words. "Shadow, you're so funny." The video call with Sophie that evening was emotional. As Emma shared the breakthrough, Sophie beamed with pride. "See?" she said, "sometimes the scariest choices lead to the most beautiful moments." Looking at Shadow in the golden California sunset, Emma realized how true those words were. Their journey had begun with fear, her terror at being thrown into his pen, his reputation as an untamable stallion. But by facing that fear together, they had discovered a purpose greater than themselves. The stallion lifted his head to catch the evening breeze, his dappled coat painted in shades of rose and gold by the setting sun. In his eyes, Emma saw the same gentle wisdom that had captured her heart so many months ago. They were far from the mountain home, but together they were exactly where they needed to be. The California spring brought new challenges and unexpected joys to Shadow's temporary home. The therapy facility's gardens burst into bloom, painting the grounds in vibrant colors that contrasted sharply with the golden hills surrounding them. As their second month in California began, Emma noticed subtle changes in Shadow's demeanor that spoke of his growing confidence in his role. One morning, as Emma arrived for their daily routine, she found Dr. Chen deep in conversation with a military veteran in a wheelchair. The man's service dog sat alertly by his side, and Emma was struck by the tension in his posture, a mirror of Shadow's old defensive stance. "Emma!" Dr. Chen called out. "This is Sergeant James Cooper. He's interested in expanding our program to work with veterans suffering from PTSD. Would you and Shadow be willing to help us explore this possibility?" Shadow, who had been watching from his stall, nickered softly at the sound of Emma's name. The service dog's ears pricked forward, interested in the gentle sound. Sergeant Cooper noticed the interaction, his rigid posture softening slightly. "Your horse," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been watching him work with the children. There's something about him, like he understands what it's like to be trapped by fear." Emma led Shadow out, noting how carefully he moved as they approached. The stallion seemed to sense the delicate nature of the moment, maintaining a respectful distance while showing gentle interest. The service dog watched attentively but remained calm, taking cues from Shadow's peaceful demeanor. Over the next few weeks, a new program took shape. Sergeant Cooper brought other veterans to the facility, each carrying invisible wounds from their service. Shadow approached each one differently, somehow understanding their unique needs. For some, he was a silent presence, offering quiet companionship. For others, he became a bridge to expressing emotions they had long buried. Maya, their young trauma patient, continued to make progress as well. She had begun helping with Shadow's daily care, finding confidence in being trusted with simple tasks. The sight of the small girl leading the magnificent stallion through his grooming routine became a powerful symbol of the healing taking place at the facility. One afternoon, as Emma watched Shadow working with a group of veterans, her phone buzzed with a video call from Silver Creek. Sophie's excited face filled the screen, with Madison peering over her shoulder. "Emma, guess what?" Sophie burst out, barely containing her excitement. "I took my first steps without crutches today, just across the physical therapy room, but still, I wanted Shadow to see." Emma turned the phone so Shadow could view the Ishii screen. The stallion's ears pricked forward at the sound of Sophie's voice, and he nickered softly in response. Sophie's eyes filled with tears at the familiar sound. "We miss you both so much," Madison added, "but the stories about your work, they are inspiring everyone here. We've started a new program with at-risk teens using what we learned from Shadow." The call ended with promises to share more updates, leaving Emma thoughtful. Shadow gently nudged her shoulder, sensing her momentary melancholy. The gesture reminded her of how far they'd come from that first frightening encounter in his pen. Their work with Sergeant Cooper's group led to an unexpected breakthrough. One of the veterans, a young woman named Sarah, who had barely spoken during sessions, arrived one morning in visible distress. Before anyone could intervene, Shadow broke. From his usual routine, he walked directly to her, positioning himself so she could lean against his solid frame, offering silent support as she finally let her tears fall. Dr. Chen's team documented everything, amazed by Shadow's ability to adapt his approach for each person he worked with. "He's not just responding to their physical presence," Dr. Chen observed. "He's reading their emotional state and adjusting his behavior accordingly. This could revolutionize how we approach equine therapy." The facility began receiving visits from other therapy programs, eager to learn from their success. Emma found herself sharing their story again and again, how a moment of fear had transformed into a journey of healing, not just for Shadow and herself, but for countless others. Maya, who now spoke regularly during sessions, became an unexpected ambassador for the program. She would tell new visitors about Shadow, her voice strong and clear as she explained how he had helped her find her words again. The stuffed horse she had clutched so tightly during their first meeting now sat forgotten on a shelf, She preferred the real connection she had found with Shadow. As their time in California drew to a close, Dr. Chen organized a special demonstration day. Families, medical professionals, and representatives from other therapy programs gathered to witness the transformation their work had inspired. Sergeant Cooper led the presentations, describing how Shadow had helped him and his fellow veterans rediscover trust and hope. Maya demonstrated the confidence she had gained, leading Shadow through a series of exercises they had developed together. Even Sarah, the quiet veteran, spoke briefly about her experience. The highlight came when they played a video message from Sophie, showing her walking independently across the Silver Creek stable yard. Shadow watched the screen intently, his soft nicker of recognition bringing tears to many eyes. That evening, as the California sun painted the hills in shades of gold and pink, Emma sat with Shadow in the sensory garden. The stallion rested his head on her shoulder, their familiar pose of quiet connection. The scent of blooming flowers filled the air, so different from their mountain pine forests, yet somehow just as much a part of their story now. "You've changed so many lives," Emma whispered, stroking his dappled neck. "And to think it all started because I was pushed into your pen." Shadow lifted his head slightly, his wise eyes meeting hers with understanding. They had both been afraid that day, but by facing their fears together, they had discovered a purpose neither could have imagined. Dr. Chen found them there as twilight approached. "I have a proposal for you both," she said, settling on a nearby bench. "We'd like to establish a permanent exchange program between our facility and Silver Creek. Shadow has shown us that the best therapy horses aren't always the ones with perfect backgrounds, sometimes the ones who have overcome their own fears, make the most understanding teachers. The idea of creating a lasting connection between their mountain home and this place of healing seemed perfect. Shadow would continue to influence both programs, his story inspiring others to look past appearances and fear to find the potential within. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Emma thought about their journey home to Silver Creek. They would return changed by their experiences here, carrying new knowledge and understanding. But more importantly, they would return knowing that their story had sparked a movement, showing others that sometimes the most powerful healing comes from unexpected connections. Shadow lifted his head to catch the evening breeze, his coat silver in the fading light. In his gentle eyes, Emma saw the same wisdom that had been there all along, waiting for someone brave enough to look past fear and find the truth beneath. Together, they had transformed a moment of terror into a lifetime of purpose, proving that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings start with a leap of faith. The return journey to Silver Creek felt different from their original trip to California. Shadow stood calmly in his trailer, his demeanor reflecting the quiet confidence he had gained during their 3 months away. The Golden Hills gradually gave way to familiar mountain landscapes, and Emma felt her heart lift as they approached their valley home. News of their arrival had spread, and it seemed the entire community had gathered at Silver Creek to welcome them back. Sophie stood at the front of the crowd, taking proud steps without her crutches, though she kept them nearby for security. Madison and the other girls had decorated the stable entrance with streamers and welcome signs. As Shadow stepped down from the trailer, his ears pricked forward at the sight of familiar faces. Mrs. Anderson stood beside Sophie, tears glistening in her eyes as she watched the stallion take in his surroundings. The mountain air was crisp with the scent of pine, welcoming them home. But the biggest surprise awaited inside the stable. During their absence, the community had worked together to transform Silver Creek. New therapy equipment lined the arena. Walls and several stalls had been modified to accommodate riders with special needs. A photograph of Shadow working with Maya hung prominently in the entrance, alongside pictures from their California journey. "We've been busy," Mrs. Anderson explained, leading them through the renovated facility. "Your work in California inspired, So many people. We've already got a waiting list for our expanded therapy program. The changes went beyond physical improvements. Other horses in the stable demonstrated newfound calmness, influenced by the example Shadow had set before his departure. Even the most challenging horses showed signs of transformation, as if his story had given their handlers new hope and patience. That evening, as the excitement died down, Emma sat with Shadow in his old pen. The familiar mountains rose against the darkening sky, their peaks still touched with snow despite the warming season. The stallion stood quietly beside her, his presence as steady and reassuring as ever. A soft footstep made them both look up. Maya stood at the pen entrance, clutching a small suitcase. She had flown in with Dr. Chen to help establish the exchange program between the facilities. The formerly silent girl now spoke with quiet confidence as she explained the contents of her suitcase. Drawings and letters from the California veterans, all expressing their gratitude for Shadow's influence in their lives. "Sergeant Cooper wanted you to have this," Maya said, pulling out a carefully folded American flag. "He said Shadow taught him that strength isn't about being fearless. It's about moving forward despite your fears," as if understanding the significance of the moment. Shadow lowered his head to gently nuzzle the flag. The gesture brought fresh tears to Maya's eyes as she remembered her own journey from silence to speech, guided by this remarkable horse's patient understanding. The following days brought a steady stream of visitors eager to learn from their experience. Mrs. Anderson and Dr. Chen worked together to develop a comprehensive program that would combine the best aspects of both facilities. Shadow's story became the foundation for their approach, proving that with patience, understanding, and trust, even the deepest wounds could heal. Sophie's progress continued to inspire everyone. She began helping with beginner riding lessons, her own experience making her especially attuned to others' fears and hesitations. The sight of her walking confidently alongside nervous new riders, offering encouragement and understanding, brought Emma back to their own beginning. Madison, who had once orchestrated the frightening prank that started it all, had become one of the program's strongest advocates. She worked particularly well with troubled teens, sharing her own story of how witnessing Shadow's transformation had changed her perspective on judgment and second chances. 1 year to the day after Emma's terrifying first encounter with Shadow, Silver Creek hosted a special celebration. Participants from both facilities gathered to share stories and demonstrate the progress they had made. Maya performed a beautiful Liberty demonstration with Shadow, their fluid movements showing the perfect trust between human and horse. Sophie demonstrated her walking progress, supported by the therapy techniques they had developed together. The highlight of the day came when Sergeant Cooper's group arrived, having flown in specially for the occasion. The veterans presented Shadow with a custom-made blanket embroidered with symbols representing the lives he had touched. The stallion stood regally as Emma draped it over his back, his gentle eyes taking in the gathering of people whose lives he had helped transform. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Emma found a quiet moment with Shadow. The stallion's coat glowed in the golden light as he lowered his head to her shoulder, the same gesture that had first shown her his true nature on that fateful day in his pen. "You know what I've learned," she heard Maya say to Sophie nearby. "Sometimes the scariest moments in our lives are actually doorways to something beautiful. We just have to be brave enough to step through them." Emma smiled at the wisdom in those words. Their journey had begun with fear, her terror at being thrown into Shadow's pen, his reputation as an untamable stallion. But by facing that fear together, they had discovered a purpose greater than themselves, touching lives in ways they could never have imagined. The exchange program between Silver Creek and the California facility continued to grow, creating a network of understanding and healing that spread far beyond their mountain valley. Shadow's story inspired other programs to look more deeply at horses others had given up on, recognizing that sometimes the most wounded souls have the most to teach about healing. As darkness settled over Silver Creek, the stars emerging one by one above the mountain peaks, Emma watched Shadow move peacefully among the gathered people. Children reached out to touch his soft coat. Veterans found comfort in his steady presence, and those struggling with their own fears found courage in his example. The Stallion, who had once been feared as untamable, had become a teacher, showing everyone who met him that true strength lies not in the absence of fear, but in the courage to move beyond it. His journey from isolated outcast to beloved healer had changed not just his own life, but countless others, proving that sometimes the most beautiful transformations begin with a single moment of trust. As the celebration wound down, Emma led Shadow back to his pen for the night. The mountain air was crisp and clear, carrying the promise of tomorrow's adventures. In the distance, an owl called softly, its voice echoing across the peaceful valley. Shadow lifted his head to catch the evening breeze, his wise eyes reflecting the starlight above. Together, they had transformed a moment of fear into a lifetime of purpose, showing the world that sometimes the most powerful connections come from the most unexpected beginnings. And as Shadow gently nickered his goodnight, Emma knew their story would continue to inspire others to look past their fears and find the beauty waiting on the other side. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.